Yijun had always believed love was a distraction. As the youngest billionaire CEO in Seoul's tech empire, his life was made of contracts, boardrooms, and perfectly measured decisions. His heart had never interfered, until the afternoon he saw her. She stood in the hotel lobby like a quiet miracle. Zina. Her skin glowed like polished bronze under the soft lights. Her natural hair framed her face with effortless grace, and her eyes, deep, calm, ancient, met his for only a second. That second was enough to undo him. Something in his chest tightened. Something shifted. For the first time in his life, Yijun forgot how to breathe. He wanted to walk to her, to speak, to hear her voice. But then his gaze fell to her hand. A ring. Simple, elegant, certain. His heart sank so fast it hurt physically. He looked away, forcing his expression into calm indifference. Even his disappointment spread through him like a slow ache. He told himself it was foolish, falling for a stranger, for a woman clearly already chosen. That night, Yijun lay awake longer than he ever had, haunted by the image of a woman he would never know. A week passed. He buried himself in work, yet everything reminded him of her. Warm coffee, soft laughter in passing hallways, the color of sunset against glass buildings. Then fate intervened. Yijun stepped into a private art gallery for a charity event, absently adjusting his cufflinks. As he turned the corner, there she was, Zina. This time, she wasn't across the room. She was close enough for him to see the fine details, the gentle curve of her smile, the softness of her breathing. Their eyes met again. Recognition flickered between them. She smiled first. A real smile. Warm. Curious. "Hello," she said, her voice smooth and melodic. His heart betrayed him that he bowed slightly, polite but restrained. "Hello." Silence stretched, charged, fragile. Then he noticed something. Her left hand was bare. No ring. His breath caught. "I apologize if this is forward," Yijun said carefully, his voice lower than usual. "But last week you were wearing a ring." Zina laughed softly, shaking her head. "My mother's. I wear it when I miss her. I'm not married." Relief rushed through him so suddenly he almost smiled. Almost. Instead, he nodded, eyes gentler now. "I'm glad." She tilted her head. "You were disappointed?" He didn't deny it. They talked that night about art, travel, childhood memories. Zina told him about growing up in Africa, about strength passed through generations of women. Yijun spoke about loneliness behind success, about nights when wealth couldn't quiet the heart. By the end of the evening, something precious had formed between them. Unspoken, but undeniable. Days turned into stolen lunches, long walks, quiet laughter. Yijun fell slowly this time, deliberately, reverently. He loved the way Zina listened like his words mattered, the way she reached for his hand without hesitation, the way she grounded him, made the world feel less cold. One evening, standing beneath city lights, he finally confessed. "I fell for you the first time I saw you," he said, "even when I thought you belonged to someone else." Zina stepped closer, resting her forehead against his chest. "And I felt safe with you before I knew your name." He held her then, not like a billionaire claiming something, but like a man grateful for fate's second chance. Their love didn't rush. It bloomed, steady, sincere, and strong. And every time Yijun looked at her hands now, he felt only peace, knowing that when a ring came again, it would be because he had placed it there, with a heart that finally believed in love. Their first kiss. The night air was calm, wrapped in the quiet glow of Seoul's city lights. Yijun and Zina stood on the balcony of his penthouse, the world below them humming faintly. Cars like distant stars, lives moving on while time seemed to pause just for them. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Zina leaned against the railing, her arms folded loosely, her gaze lifted toward the sky. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Not the city, but the stillness between them. Yijun watched her instead of the skyline. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals without fear, but standing this close to her made his chest tighten in a way nothing else ever had. He stepped closer, careful, as though sudden movement might break the moment. "Xena," he said quietly. She turned to him. Their faces were inches apart now. He lifted his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away, but she didn't. His fingers brushed her cheek, warm and gentle, as if memorizing the softness of her skin. Her breath hitched, and her eyes softened, dark and trusting. "I've wanted to do this since the first moment I saw you," he confessed, voice barely above a whisper. "But only if you want it too." Instead of answering, Xena reached for his hand and pressed it to her heart. "I do." That was all the permission he needed. He leaned in slowly, reverently, letting the moment stretch, letting anticipation bloom. Their lips met in a kiss so tender it felt like a promise rather than a claim. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't hungry. It was soft, lingering, full of wonder. Two souls finally touching after weeks of restraint. Xena sighed against his lips, her hand curling into his jacket, grounding herself in him. Yijun deepened the kiss just slightly, careful not to overwhelm, his thumb brushing her jaw as if afraid she might disappear. When they finally pulled apart, their foreheads rested together, breaths mingling. Yijun smiled, a real smile, unguarded and rare. "So," he murmured, "this is what I've been missing." Xena laughed softly, her fingers still holding on to him. "No," she said gently. "This is what you were waiting for." He kissed her again, briefly this time, sweet and certain. And in that kiss, Yijun knew one thing clearly. No empire, no fortune, no success would ever compare to the way her lips felt against his heart. The city had quieted by the time Xena followed Yijun into his penthouse. Not with nervousness, but with trust. The lights were dim, warm amber, casting soft shadows across glass walls and polished floors. Outside, Seoul shimmered like a living constellation. But inside, the world felt smaller, gentler. Yijun removed his jacket and placed it carefully aside, as if everything tonight deserved intention. "Are you comfortable?" he asked, his voice low, sincere. Xena nodded. "With you, yes." Something in his chest loosened at those words. They sat together on the sofa, close but not touching at first, the space between them humming with quiet awareness. Yijun poured tea instead of wine. Something grounding, something honest. Xena wrapped her hands around the cup, warmth seeping into her palms. "You don't seem like the kind of man who lets people stay." He smiled faintly. "I'm not." Then, after a pause, "But I wanted you to." That was when she reached for him. Her fingers slid into his, fitting naturally, as if they'd practiced this in another life. Yijun inhaled sharply, then exhaled slowly, resting his forehead against hers. They stayed like that for a long moment, breathing together, listening to each other's heartbeats. He spoke first. "I spend my life being needed. Tonight, I just want to be known." Xena lifted her free hand and traced the line of his jaw, gentle and grounding. "Then let me stay," she whispered. "Not for what you are, but for who you are when you're quiet." His arms wrapped around her then, carefully, reverently, pulling her into his chest. She fit there so easily it startled him. They didn't rush. They talked about childhood fears, about loneliness, about dreams they'd never said aloud. Xena told him about nights under wide African skies, about strength learned from women who loved fiercely. Yijun confessed how success had cost him softness, and how she had returned it without trying. Later, when they moved to the bedroom, it wasn't with heat, but with tenderness. They lay beside each other, fully clothed, facing one another beneath crisp white sheets. Yijun brushed her hair back slowly, memorizing the curve of her face. "Stay," he murmured. Not a command, but a hope. Xena smiled and rested her hand over his heart. "I'm here." They fell asleep like that, hands intertwined, hearts exposed, the city watching silently as two souls chose closeness over haste. And for the first time in years, Yijun slept deeply. Not because he owned everything, but because at last he wasn't alone. Yijun had planned billion-1 acquisitions with precision, but this required patience of the heart. Weeks passed after that night of quiet closeness. No rush, no pressure, just a deepening rhythm between them. Morning calls, handwritten notes left on pillows, shared silences that felt fuller than words. Xena didn't ask for promises. That was why he wanted to give her one. He brought her to a place she loved most. Not a grand hall, not flashing lights, but a quiet hill overlooking the Han River at dusk. The sky was painted in gold and soft lavender, the city glowing beneath it like a held breath. They sat on a bench, her shoulder resting against his. "Do you know?" Yi-jun said softly. "Why did I bring you here?" Xena smiled. "Because it's peaceful." He nodded. "And because the first time I felt peace was with you." She turned toward him then, sensing the weight in his voice. Yi-jun stood slowly, as though the moment itself needed care. He didn't kneel immediately. Instead, he reached for her hands and held them between his own, thumbs brushing her skin. "When I met you," he continued, "I thought love would be loud, overwhelming, something that would take control." His eyes shone, honest and unguarded. "But loving you has been quiet, steady, like coming home after a long war." Xena's breath trembled. "You didn't try to change me," he said. "You didn't ask me to be more or less. You simply stayed, and in staying, you healed parts of me I didn't know were broken." Only then did he lower himself to one knee. The city seemed to fade. Yi-jun opened a small velvet box, not with a dazzling stone, but a ring simple and elegant, timeless, chosen with care. "I don't want to own your future," he said, voice thick with emotion. "I want to walk beside you in it, to learn your silences, to protect your laughter, to be the man you can rest your heart on." Xena's eyes filled with tears before he even asked. "Xena," he whispered, "will you marry me? Not because I am a billionaire, but because I love you with a patience that will never leave?" She covered her mouth, shaking her head in disbelief, tears spilling freely. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, I choose you." He slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled. His first promise made without contracts, without witnesses, without fear. When he stood, she fell into his arms, crying softly against his chest as he kissed her hair, her temples, her tears. "Thank you," he whispered, "for choosing me." Xena smiled through her tears. "You were always mine. You just took your time realizing it." As the sun disappeared beyond the river, Yi-jun held his fiancée and knew this was the greatest deal he would ever make. The morning of the wedding arrived softly, as if the world itself didn't want to rush what had taken so long to bloom. Sunlight spilled gently over the garden estate overlooking the sea, where white roses intertwined with vibrant African florals, golden marigolds, deep indigo fabrics, and touches of emerald green. It was a union not just of two hearts, but of two worlds meeting with reverence. Yi-jun stood beneath a floral arch, dressed in an elegant ivory suit, his usually composed expression softened by nerves he didn't try to hide. For the first time in his life, power meant nothing. Only she did. When the music changed, the air seemed to still. Xena appeared at the end of the aisle. She wore a gown that flowed like silk poetry, delicate lace along her shoulders, the fabric embracing her grace rather than overwhelming it. Her hair was styled simply, crowned with a subtle gold headpiece that honored her heritage. In her hands, she carried a bouquet woven with meaning, flowers chosen for strength, endurance, and love. Yi-jun's breath caught. Tears blurred his vision before he could stop them. As Xena walked toward him, their eyes locked, and everything else faded. The guests, the ocean, the passing of time. All he saw was the woman who had taught his heart how to be gentle. When she reached him, he whispered, barely holding himself together, "You are more beautiful than every dream I ever had." She smiled, her eyes shining. "And you are my answered prayer." The ceremony was intimate. Their vows weren't long, but they were honest. Yi-jun spoke first, his voice steady but full of feeling. "I promise to choose you in silence and in celebration, to protect your peace, to listen when you don't speak, to love you not loudly, but faithfully, every day of my life." Xena took his hands, her thumbs brushing comfort into his skin. I promise to walk beside you, not behind you, to remind you who you are when the world asks too much, to love you with patience, courage, and joy, until love itself feels like home. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, Yijun didn't wait. He kissed her, slow, reverent, full of gratitude, like a man who knew this moment had been earned. Applause rose, laughter followed, and the sky seemed brighter for it. At the reception, cultures danced together. Traditional Korean melodies blended seamlessly with African rhythms. Guests laughed, clapped, and celebrated as Yijun and Zina danced barefoot on the grass. Her dress lifted slightly, his hands steady at her waist. Later, as evening settled and lanterns glowed warmly, Yijun pulled Zina close, resting his forehead against hers. I looked at your hand once and thought I'd lost you forever, he murmured. She smiled softly. And now, he said, kissing her knuckles where the ring rested. I get to hold you for the rest of my life. They ended the night not with grandeur, but with quiet, walking hand in hand under the stars, married not just by vows, but by patience, fate, and a love that had learned how to wait. And in that stillness, Yijun knew this was not the beginning of forever. It was the continuation of a love that had always been meant to find its way back. The world felt quieter when the door to their suite closed behind them. No guests, no music, no applause. Yijun helped her remove her jewelry first, each piece set aside carefully, as if honoring every part of the day. When he brushed her hair loose, his fingers trembled, not with desire alone, but with awe. I waited my whole life to love like this, he confessed. Zina stepped closer and rested her head against his shoulder. And I waited to be loved gently. They changed into comfortable clothes, choosing closeness over ceremony. When they finally lay down, it was side by side, facing one another, hands intertwined beneath the sheets. Yijun traced her palms slowly, memorizing the ring now resting there. I promise, he whispered, that this hand will never feel alone again. Zina moved closer, fitting perfectly into his arms, her cheek against his heart. She listened to his steady rhythm, the sound grounding and sure. Stay awake with me, she murmured. So they talked, quietly, honestly, about the future, about the home they would build, about mornings filled with shared silence and laughter. Every word wrapped them tighter together. Eventually, sleep found them. Yijun kissed her forehead and held her as if the night itself might try to take her away. Zina's hand remained over his heart, her presence anchoring him in a way nothing ever had. That night, there was no urgency, only peace, only belonging. And as dawn approached, Yijun realized something profound. Marriage hadn't changed how he loved her. It had simply given that love a name and forever. The child who made their love visible. Yijun noticed the change before Zina said a word. She had been standing by the kitchen window one morning, sunlight spilling over her, one hand resting unconsciously on her stomach, the other holding a cup of tea she hadn't touched. You're quiet, he said gently. Zina turned, her eyes shining with something new, something fragile and powerful. She reached into her pocket and placed a small test into his palm. For a long moment, Yijun didn't understand. Then he did. His breath left him in a soft, broken laugh. Zina! Tears filled his eyes as he pulled her into his arms, one hand trembling as it covered her stomach, as if afraid the miracle might disappear if he didn't hold on. There's life here, he whispered, because of us. Zina smiled through her tears. You're going to be a father. He sank to his knees, not in weakness, but in awe, resting his forehead against her belly. I will protect you both, he vowed quietly, with everything I am. The months that followed softened him in ways the world never had. Yijun attended every appointment, held Zina's hand through every ache, learned how to soothe her fears before she spoke to them. At night, he spoke to her belly in low whispers. Promises, dreams, stories of a father who would always come home. Zina watched him with love so deep it sometimes scared her. You were made for this, she told him once. I was made for you, he replied, kissing her gently. The night their child arrived, rain fell softly against hospital windows. Yijun stayed close, never letting go of Zena's hand, murmuring encouragement, grounding her with his presence. When the first cry finally filled the room, time seemed to stop. A baby girl, wrapped in white, perfect, tiny. Yijun's knees nearly gave way when the nurse placed her in his arms. His billionaire's hands, used to sign empires into existence, trembled as they held something infinitely more precious. She has your eyes, he said, voice breaking. Zena reached out, tears streaming freely. And your heart. They named her Era, meaning beautiful and graceful. A bridge between worlds, a symbol of love that crossed continents and found its home. That night, back home, Yijun stood by the crib watching his daughter sleep, Zena leaning against his shoulder. I used to think success was legacy, he murmured. But this is eternity. Zena slipped her hand into his. She'll know she was loved from the beginning. He kissed his wife's temple, then their daughter's tiny hand, his heart fuller than he'd ever imagined possible. In that quiet room, beneath the soft rhythm of their child's breathing, Yijun understood something clearly. Love had given him more than a family. It had given him purpose. And from that night on, everything he built, every dream, every future, would begin and end with the two people who had changed his life forever. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment. Also like, share and subscribe to my channel and click on the notification icon so that you will get notified whenever a new story is uploaded.